the pesticides and what can determine what is safe and what is not. And clearly this is one that they otherwise would have not very safe. Now, let's just begin with a question. So it's not a question in this case of whether or not the Russians rigged the election. No, it's not a question of whether or not this was a good or bad decision. What I'm interested in is
the only way the Russians rigged the election is by voting for Trump.
What I'm interested in is the question of executive authority and the politics that underpin that, and I'll explain what I mean momentarily. So, you're going to need your computers here because I'm going to ask you to do something. So, get your computers out. Did you take care of everything?
Yeah, they needed my picture for a visa.
When's the trip?
July?
Middle of summer. Beijing.
And then after that, Harbin.
Here's what my first question. My first question for you, I'm going to need something to write with because you won't be able to figure this out without I want you to look up the Cuyahoga River fire. Did I have you look it up already? Yes. Some people don't know what I'm talking about, so anyway, if you look this up, please. The bridge was the I-35W in Minnesota. This is in Ohio. Yes. Yes, you should. See, it helps having math and science students. You should be asking the question: how does a river catch on fire?
Pollution.
When did this happen?
November 3rd, 1952.
1969.
What? June 1969. Okay, that date is going to be very important for some other things. The Cuyahoga River is going to have like the same role as Shays' Rebellion did during the Constitution.
So that was the one that all those people were like, it was Berkeley, right?
No, that's Berkeley's Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion was all of the veterans of the American Revolution who were...
Far upstream of where this oil slick caught fire in 1969 is where the Cuyahoga's comeback is most dramatic, here between Cleveland and Akron. The evidence is under rocks, where various bugs are now found, bugs that cannot stand much pollution.
I've, of course, been optimistic about that, thinking that's a good sign that the river's on its way to meeting the state water quality standard of a warm water aquatic habitat.
The lower Cuyahoga River is getting better too, as shown ironically by the annual winter fish
Indeed, it was a
die-off.
pesticide and it
Until
was
these
banned. The
small
question
shads
is,
go
why was
belly
it
up
banned?
from the cold, they are able to live in this once barren water. But there's a long way to go. The lower river is still one of the 32 worst spots on the Great Lakes, as the Ohio EPA learned in 1984. Here in the Ship Channel, chemical companies and steel mills routinely poured in poison. Too much lead, cyanide, and ammonia were found, as were fish with tumors probably caused by pollution from coke ovens. At times the water was devoid of oxygen, and sewers contributed to bacteria. The last 5 years have not seen many improvements.
In terms of a grading system, years ago it was nothing but an F for all the way. Now it's moving up maybe D plus, C minus.
In 1987, the U.S. and Canada outlined the cleanup for its 42 areas of concern, including the Cuyahoga. The specific plan to accomplish this is not yet ready, but cleaning up deliberate pollution won't prevent accidental assaults on our river.
writer in
including
the
some that are
science
hauntingly
division
similar
of
to
the
what
US
led to the
Army.
infamous fire. Back in
And she
March,
goes on
during
to
one
a
6-day
career
period,
as a-
there were 3
as a
reported
writer,
oil and gasoline spills
as a
into the
science
Cuyahoga,
writer.
traced
She
eventually
wrote
to
an
BP
earlier book,
America.
which was about the
Luckily
oceans,
for the
which
improving
was,
river
very
and our
well
city's
received.
improving
And
image,
then
nothing
she wrote
happened
this
to
book,
spark a
which
flame.
was, for her, an expose of DDT. She got all people were giving her information, and they started sending her all kinds of stuff that wasn't actually published. And she exposes what was happening with DDT. And the story is kind of like this, so I'll give you kind of a thumbnail sketch. During World War II, the US government developed this pesticide, DDT. It was incredibly powerful and incredibly valuable in wartime because you send your soldiers into tropical areas, in this case in Southeast Asia, and you drop a bunch of DDT on the insects and basically kill everything with wings. And it's great because your soldiers don't get sick with malaria or yellow fever or anything else they might actually pick up from insects, right? Because you've killed everything. So coming out of the war, there is this kind of overconfidence. Wow, we can really control the natural world. And DDT becomes something that everyone wants to use. Like the cities want to kill all the mosquitoes in the towns, and DDT is seen as like this fix miracle drug, except for
It's a pesticide.
yeah, exactly. It is incredibly effective. So effective that it doesn't just kill the insects. It turns out it has the effect. Who mentioned bald eagles earlier? It has the effect of softening the shells of all birds who are exposed to it. And they also find, I heard somebody saying cancer causing, yes, of course, cancer ends up being part of this as well. The main problem is that the birds simply are not being born. Because the shells are too soft, it's not protecting them and they're dying while they're still in the egg.
But they still grow and stuff. They're just more vulnerable.
I cannot tell you about the development. I just know that this is what happens. And the result is that the bird population is declining. And they noticed this first. There are some researchers up at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they make an observation. They're like, wow, this is very strange what we're seeing here with birds this spring. And it turns out there are a bunch of other people also making these same observations. And she writes, the title of her book is about a time which she expects to be not in the distant future, when all the snow melts, you go outside in the springtime, and it's completely silent. No bird calls of any kind because there aren't any birds, right? Silent spring. This book goes on to be an incredible bestseller. The Kennedy administration puts together a panel, like a president's commission to actually investigate, and they start turning against DDT and banning its usage. Now, it was so effective that bed bugs pretty much were unheard of until just a few years ago. I don't know if you knew that. Bed bugs have come back, but it turns out bed bugs were held for almost 50 years. There were no bed bug cases in the U.S. because DDT had killed all of them. But they're now back.
So if I spray DDT in my house, they come.
And maybe
Thomas, that's a good question. It's probably an SIR topic. I have no idea. If you're really interested in insects, which I know that you are. No, because he's a big fan. So I have no idea making that up. So DDT and Rachel Carson's expose, they happen in the 60s. At the same time that there are, I wish I could say that the Cuyahoga River was the only river to catch fire in the 90s.
It wasn't.
But in fact, it was not. The Cuyahoga is in Ohio. It drains into Lake Erie. So the 1960s are this period not just of DDT and rivers catching fire. It also ends up becoming this period when groups like Public Citizen, under the leadership of a guy named Ralph Nader, start taking on campaigns talking about, there was the name of the car slipping my mind, it did this morning as well. They have a campaign against this car, which they say was so unsafe that it was unsafe at any speed. And they actually have, again, government investigations into the safety of the cars, and the government starts putting regulations on the car industry in terms of safety. There is this kind of revamped progressivism surfaces in the late 1960s as a result of, and by progressivism I'm talking about positive government, right? This idea that the government is useful in addressing things like rivers catching on fire, DDT killing all of the bird population, cars being not very safe, and a good stat for how they would actually gauge their success. It turns out when the seatbelt laws are adopted, there are a lot of, I still hear people sometimes complaining about seatbelt laws, which I find a very antiquated thing. But then again, I have a lot of family in Montana, and they hate everything. So it turns out that statistically speaking, as soon as the seatbelt laws go into effect, the number of traffic deaths actually drops by 30%. Like there is a direct cause and effect relationship between the rule and the fact that traffic deaths decline.
Was the seatbelt law requiring people to wear seatbelts?
Yes.
Wait, so cars had seatbelts and you weren't required to wear them?
Exactly.
Some cars didn't.
I know all of you take this as just perfectly reasonable, natural thing. You get in the car, you put on the seatbelt. But there was a time when that was not the case. The time was you got in your car, you started driving, and the seatbelt never went on. Why are there not? Well, actually, lots of them do have them. One of the reasons and I think actually Illinois has a law where small children actually have to wear seatbelts now on buses. But one of the reasons is basic physics. What would be the basic physics of buses and accidents?
Momentum.
Yes, the bus wins.
How they're both put in the same bus?
Right, which is rare enough that they apparently didn't warrant it.
But what about how the child pushes back on the bus? Against the child.
People not support this guy.
Yeah, but in that logic, we should put seatbelts on the tiny buses, right?
You have a question?
Yeah, some, I don't know, there's one study I was reading about, for some, okay, so my grandpa was working, he had this van.
Okay.
He kept all his tools there. And the tools were right behind the driver's side seat, so there was a lot of weight behind the driver's side seat with all the metal in it. And so if he got in an accident and he was wearing a seatbelt, the force of that against the back of the seat would do more damage than. So
That's why I don't wear a seatbelt.
that's why he didn't wear a seatbelt. It's he's been in accidents before.
Why didn't he move the tools?
Because he had to carry them to his workplace.
Yeah, lots of people who didn't wear seatbelts always had a reason why they didn't wear their seatbelts.
I saw this video in Driver's Ed where it was this dude slammed the back seat from the back side, and then it moved the seat up and then smashed the other person.
Yeah, I think we're going to get back on topic now. So, would you have a look at, there's another document, it's a Word document that says, it says progressivism, it's a Word document, progressivism as in something, I'm forgetting the title.
Have you ever seen Red Asphalt 3?
You know what? See, you guys play off each other. What would be better is if you were, I don't know, punching him in the nose periodically. So then I don't have to do it because I'll get fired.
I'll get fired.
You only get in trouble if I see it, which I don't. So, progressivism and reaction is the name of the document.
I have no reason to punch.
You red carpet all over.
Well, that's what I was just saying. You guys
Yeah, help each other.
Exactly.
We're a team.
Yeah. Same room, same lane. Same
They're
wall.
roommates. You know that? I mean, Dr. Smith, our class is better than this class, right?
No.
Yes.
It was fun. Yeah. First class.
Then why is he in here?
Yeah, why is he?
He's trying to bring up its value.
Wait, I thought you always talking about bad first month.
The problem is they're zombies, right? Every morning when I see them, I'm like, the zombie apocalypse has actually come. I didn't think it was real. I was wrong.
That's me.
And then you see us.
Yeah, and then you see us.
No, and then I see you and I'm thinking, you know what? A ban on caffeine would not be a bad idea.
I can't drink caffeine.
Insert prohibition.
So, would you please look at this document? It is a sample.
Oh, just kidding. A little bit more. Yeah, why would you want
No, but I have a script text of
What does Trump have to do with?
it has nothing to do with Trump at all, but I'm getting there.
Okay.
It has to do with the EPA.
Barack Obama.
Glass-Steagall is one of the New Deal regulations that said that investment banks and commercial banks cannot be the same entities. They have to separate operations. It is getting hot here.
It's hot everywhere. Why would we
No, it's not that. It's that it takes them a long time. Because it's not like flipping a switch in your house. They actually have to dismantle the entire thing, tear it apart, and then put new stuff in. No, because big industrial heating and air conditioning units require a lot of labor to like pull them apart and put them together.
I'll do this. There's like 500 kids in here.
Yeah.
So, okay, back to our attention. What I'm getting, here's what I want to point out. So, actually, let me start with this part. This guy, Tricky Dick,
Wait, what did Richard Nixon?
Richard Nixon. Okay, that's actually from the 1960, not the 1968 campaign. But anyway, he that was the one where he ran against Kennedy. No, that's Lodge. That's his vice president. Kennedy. Yes, his career ends in well, infamy. Because of Watergate, and he's the only president to ever resign, and so there's this scandal and everything. But what's interesting about him is that, politically speaking, while he did certainly do some things that were very conservative, he was very much a product of the New Deal, like a lot of politicians from his era. Which is to say, he didn't question the value of the federal government. Like you never would have had a question about a lot of programs, to the point that he's actually responsible for something on that list. What is it?
EPA.
He actually is the guy who creates the EPA. Now, the gravity of this you're not going to quite appreciate yet, but so we have him creating the EPA. He's also going to create, this isn't on your list, I don't know why I didn't put it on there, but he creates, you know what, any of you know what this is?
OSHA.
Which is?
Ocean Service.
No, you're
Something
thinking of you're thinking of that.
Oh, yeah, I want to know.
Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
Yes. So, what do you suppose they do?
They protect occupational safety.
Hey, Occupy
They
Safety
make
and Health.
sure the occupations and health administration are
I'm staying healthy.
We're like people like
Make sure you're
Okay, thank you, fine, yes, for taking a risk, good job. So they are the people who inspect to make sure that safety codes are are actually being enforced and done in the workplace. And this is all workplaces ultimately. Have some kind of rules about safety. Obviously, if you're working in an industrial setting, you're more likely to have like OSHA people come. That they're quite vigilant in their enforcement to the point that lots of people were terrified of getting OSHA inspectors.
Yeah, inspectors are scary.
And both of these, again, are Nixon's era creations. He's also going to sign into law the Endangered Species Act. The original one. He's also going to sign into law the Clean Air and Water Act. It turns out it was not the first Clean Air Act or Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Acts actually go back to early in the 20th century, but the one that he oversees is different because now they actually have an agency to enforce it. And prior to the creation of the EPA, they did not have a way to actually enforce these kinds of rules. Now, agencies, when they're created, they always get something called enabling legislation. Enabling legislation means that they have the power given to them by the legislative branch, right? They now are part of the executive branch, and they're given the power to actually do what it is they're assigned to do. Now, they can, at certain times, try to stretch that to the limit. And then it goes to court, and the Supreme Court says, sorry, if you want to go that far, you'll have to get Congress to give you the power to do it, or no, you simply can't do that. It's not within the purview of the Constitution. What's that? That's. Yeah, well, what does that tell you if everyone searching for Walmart is also looking up OSHA right after that?
That helps.
Which takes us back to this. So enabling legislation gives the executive branch the power to actually enforce things. In this case, the decision is not to enforce, which is also a decision by government. But this raises a bigger question, and some of this you can see here. Why would we be in a place where and again, I think that this is one of those times when I'll sidestep and say, it doesn't matter if it's Trump. This is a governing philosophy that some people have, right? If it's not him, there are plenty of other governors of different states I could be talking about who have the same approach, which is not to do certain things. Why would we be in a place where it seems like protecting worker safety and dealing with toxic chemicals would be something we want to enforce? So how did we arrive there when the reigning king of scandals was perfectly willing to create the EPA and OSHA? So something has happened. What I suggest here is that going back to the 1930s, the New Deal, which we talked about earlier, the New Deal was something that was popular. The voters really responded. People felt that Roosevelt was actually doing something. He stops the Depression from getting worse. But he doesn't actually end the Depression, one. And in the process, he upsets a whole lot of people. Mainly businesses who now resented having to do certain things they didn't have to do before. And there is some anti-New Deal sentiment, but overall, like on the whole, he has the support of a whole lot of people. What happens in the 1960s? Can you read this? No. Yeah, you can. You're at the front of the room. What happens in the 1964 election is that President Johnson, the guy who was vice president, takes over when Kennedy is killed. I need to update all my markers next year. Johnson is up for re-election, and he runs against a guy named Goldwater. Any of you know about Goldwater? Hmm? Goldwater, I'm not gonna go into great detail about him. Here's what you need to know. He's a Republican senator from Arizona. He was also extreme. The Republican Party was kind of torn in 1964. They don't really, as it turns out, they end up picking this guy as their candidate. But by no means was he like everybody's choice. Right? No one's rallying around him. And he ends up being a complete disaster. He wins the Old South, so the states in the Deep South, the ones that were most likely to be against civil rights, they back him because they like his states' rights message, where he's saying, I don't think the federal government should be doing anything. And they're like, yes, states' rights, stay on our business. He wins the Old South and his state of Arizona. And that's it. So 1964 is a total wash. It goes to the Democrats. Johnson is reelected. The Republican Party is then stuck soul searching. And in 1968, they have to find another candidate, someone who can actually win. As it turns out, Johnson decides not to seek the re-election that year. Actually, the Democrats are having serious problems because they don't like the candidate that the people actually chose, and they go into the convention and they choose somebody else. And that upsets a whole lot of people. The Republicans come up with, are you doing the Nixon thing?
Huh?
That's what that is. I'm not a crook.
Oh, no.
That's what that was.
I'm not a crook.
You're not a crook? No. And he claimed that he wasn't either, although it turns out that he was. What, you think if she says she's not a crook, that means she is?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. Anyway, so they choose him in 1968. What's interesting is that this guy was kind of way out there, right? He's wandered off into the wilderness. Nixon, the guy who's going to be plagued by scandal, but is the same guy who precedes, he's actually the moderate, okay? And he's and by most measures, despite the fact that he was flamboyantly racist, very crude, and a bit of a control freak, he's actually politically kind of in the middle. I mean, he's fairly centrist. Now, why does that matter? It matters because by 1980, if we put this on a timeline, by 1980, they're going to have a completely different situation. He's going to resign in scandal. That's Nixon.
When?
Nixon resigns in scandal because of the Watergate, which involved him using a secret fund, spying on anyone that he didn't like. He put together an enemies list and ordered people like the FBI and the IRS to intimidate them. So like, what? No, not a hit list, but like he targets specific people with the expectation of making things difficult for them.
It's like I make it hard.
Susan, right? Susan Rice.
That's a real FBI issue.
Susan Rice was doing that in the course of doing her job. This was Nixon actually intentionally trying to do a job of people, and it was all illegal. What Susan Rice did was not illegal, but what he did was he resigns, and the Democrats can choose almost anyone in 1976 who can win. It would have been to their benefit to choose somebody who was really, really good, and instead they choose Jimmy Carter. Carter is a complete disaster, like on every conceivable level. He's not the worst president of all time. He's just incapable of actually leading his party.
Who knows? Who does that happen to?
That's kind of up for grabs at the moment. What? Well, let's see. Warren Harding has been up high on the list. And General Grant was kind of corrupt, so maybe he might be high on the list. Anyway, difficult to say. There's so many scoundrels to choose from. So anyway, Carter is up for re-election. And the other thing about that is, okay, they picked the worst possible candidate, which means he's going to have a tough road trying to get reelected in 1980. Who does he go up against? Now,
Jimmy Butler.
no, he goes up against not Mr. Goldwater, who was on the extreme in the 1960s. He goes up against Ronald Reagan, who has now taken this message that this guy had and made it mainstream. So Nixon was, in effect, kind of centrist, and his party has moved further to the right by 1980. Now, in many respects, in the final analysis, Reagan was not necessarily quite as far to the right as he's often characterized. And one of the reasons for that is that he had a completely Democratic Congress he had to work with. And so there was a lot of compromise. This was back when the two parties used to be able to compromise. Illinois is a prime example of a state of politics and what happens when people don't compromise. And so he had to compromise, and that meant that he probably did not go quite as far out as he wanted. But there's one particular phrase that sticks out. He used this phrase, government isn't part of the solution, government is part of the problem. This is in one of his first speeches. And that becomes a kind of mantra, something that the party latches onto, and they decide, he's right, government is the problem. That's anti-progressive. It's brought a halt to the advances that have been happening. Now, some people credit him with actually being the origin of it, but in fact, he's not, because the key year for us would actually be 1978, which is Carter's presidency. And it's in 1978 that the Democrats, who still have the Congress and their Democratic president, start pushing for deregulation. What is deregulation?
It's unregulated.
Okay, so remember I told you at the very beginning, the EPA, OSHA, a bunch of safety standards and so on, all of this comes in the era of regulation. It doesn't last very long. By 1978, there's this pushback. Let's start deregulating. We need less regulation. The 1970s were, especially the late 1970s, were a terrible time economically. There was the energy crisis, which I told you about, but that's only part of it. The business cycle was in a very strange place. The 1970s are actually defined by this incredible, they had to come up with a new word to describe it. Stagflation. It is made up. It's made up of two words, stagnant and inflation. Usually when you have inflation, the economy is actually growing. The problem is that it's growing out of control. What happens if you have the 1970s and you have inflation and no growth? Stagflation. So the thing is not doing very well, the economy is not doing very well. And they decide, or some people, not everyone, but some people decide that the cause is actually You know, if it wasn't for the EPA and OSHA, we wouldn't have these problems. Now, economists now say that it doesn't really make any sense. That was political, but anyway, that's politics. They decide that's the reason. So by 1978, they're pushing to deregulate, and they see that as good as solving the problem, paving the way for, you know, the 1980 election. That clock is wrong. We can fix it. 58.
It's right.
So it's right?
Yeah.
Somebody changed it, wasn't it? So what does that story that I was just telling you have to do with this? And what does that bigger story have to do with infrastructure, which I had you talking about the other day? Well, it has to, yes, go ahead.
I mean, as like the 1978 is the era of deregulation, and now he's like unregulating the.
In other words, it has continued. It has become the definition of our era. Our era, really, 1978 starts the whole thing going, and into the present, there is this governing philosophy that the government should do less and less, as opposed to doing more. So we've been living through this, sort of, you have much shorter than I have, but they're living through a period of pushback on the New Deal, progressivism, and those ideas of positive government. And this would be symbolic of that, which is why I'm saying it really isn't just about Trump. It would be about anyone who shares that governing philosophy. But what does that have to do with infrastructure? Again, in Moodle, I have a document for you. Are you going to be a civil engineer? Yeah. If you're a civil engineer, you'll be even more enthusiastic. Huh? If you open up, you're opening a document that says infrastructure, yes, underfunding. You can just look at the data. You don't have to read the whole thing. I just want you to look at some of the things. Are you not going to look? What?
I can't go on Moodle.
Why not? What do you mean?
I'm on Air
Probably.
Yo mail, Moodle. Yeah. I can go on
Wait, did it come there?
What is it?
Sales GDP. That's so weird. We're not dividing.
All of these are.
Put you in 2040?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of us.
So what?
I didn't.
What's in the document?
Some pretty radical, really big numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, you've all been through MSI, right?
Oh, that was last time.
It's fine. You've been through MSI. Shh, quiet. You've been through MSI. If you were writing up a research report, what section would you find kind of like the main part explaining to you what the whole thing was about and what we should take? Abstract.
it's like, yeah, but it was
And where would you find that in a research report?
like the very beginning. Depending on how long it is.
First paragraph.
On the graph.
All of you are just hopeless.
Just my parents keep talking.
As Dr. John said.
Scroll down.
There's more? There's 31 pages.
Yes. I told you didn't read it. You need to look at the data. And what did you do? You went to the first data set, and the whole thing
I figured it was the only data set.
the numbers are big.
That's what I said. They do one picture. That's the.
Pretty far down. How's that possible?
Why do they? So I have a couple of questions. And one of them, why do they think they can talk about 2040? Who wrote this? And what is the conclusion?
The American Society of Civil Engineers.
Okay, so we have some very clever engineers who are talking about 2040, and it has nothing to do with Tai Chi, so how did they do it?
Statistic projection.
Time machines. They all have a TARDIS.
Wait, everybody has an individual TARDIS, or they all share one big one?
It's bigger on the inside, everyone fits.
Okay. Statistic prediction.
I get to find out who all my favorite students are.
It's a police box.
Time and relative dimensions.
It's a police box.
Yeah, no crap.
Who's your favorite doctor?
Oh, no.
That's a good question.
Oh man! See, even if they're not fans, I get to like it. I like the Fourth Doctor. You like who? I have fond memories of the Fourth Doctor. Yes.
How fun.
Tom Baker got the long straw.
I like jelly babies.
Watch all the old ones.
Hulu. They have the biggest selection. You didn't answer my question. How? Okay, they don't have a target. So how are they talking about 2040? And we know that they're engineers.
Predictions.
Okay, thank you. They're extrapolating from current data.
From their interpol.
And what is their conclusion?
That it's going to be a lot higher. Everything.
What's going to get better? Okay, how do they know that?
Did they knock on wood when they did this?
There is some if-then logic going on that you skip.
I'm going to read this whole thing.
I'm pretty sure at this time of the year you can find better use for your time.
Oh, I like sleeping.
You're all hopeless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. I'm so disappointed. I'm going to end up having to like my morning zombies. Oh, I know.
I will figure out. Hey, we can be zombies. Repeat the question. You want us to? I'm on it. What was the question again? Give me exact word.
I want to know what is it that they're actually concluding, and what does this have to do with projecting it out to 2040? Yes, see if they can answer before you read this.
Where is their abstract?
They need more money for infrastructure. Why do they need more money, and why do they know that, and they're projecting out only, in this case, like 15 years from time to report.
We don't have enough space.
What's that? Well, 25 years, sorry.
They want to buy Ferraris.
Is that their motivation?
Ferrari?
I can't open the page.
I mean, if you become a civil engineer, become a project manager, and make pretty good money, you might be able to buy a Ferrari. I don't want it. But, you know, Italian engineering.
I want the first Lamborghini, the tractor.
Because he used to
I can't wait till John Deere gets into the sports car.
Oh yeah, that's
won't that be awesome?
expensive.
They're all gonna be green.
They're gonna be overpriced like his tractors. Tractors are very overpriced.
Regular price tractor.
I bought $250,000.
Like, I think I'm correct.
Yeah, that's why the farmers are always taking out big loans and just letting themselves. Let's go back to Interstate 35 West.
Don't tread on me.
Minneapolis, bridge collapse. What was that about?
Oh, they ignored the report.
They ignored the reports. These people, it's the same, I don't know if it's the exact same people, but they're saying, look, we have some problems, we need to update some things. After that bridge collapses, one of the products is, I don't know this specific report, but there was a lot of concern about infrastructure. We need to deal with the infrastructure. Last year during the campaign, both of the candidates were talking about the need for infrastructure funding. It was like the one thing that they both agreed on. Literally, it was the only thing. Now there's not much talk about it, but there was concern about it then. Why would this be a political issue, given all that I've told you? And it turns out it's even more so if we take it back to the discussion that started this, which is the trains and cars discussion. But let me just take it to today. Why is this an issue?
We have automobiles.
Planes are not practical in terms of like getting to work.
If I work in New York.
If you work in New York? I'm kind of confused.
Well, I wouldn't be able to drive there. Wow.
Yes.
Well, if I'm doing we don't have
Look it up. Okay, one obvious reason, if the infrastructure is actually getting old, you want to prevent future accidents like the one on I-35. Okay, so that's reason enough. You send out your teams of engineers, you evaluate all your bridges, determine which ones need to get updated and so on.
also if you have like infrastructure then you take like
It was one of the things these people kind of obsess about, which is kind of self-serving and therefore kind of undermines their whole argument, but it's like, well, these civil engineers, you can put more of us to work if you just fund the projects. Yes, that's true. And they do seem to be asking for some of that, although it's not their main motivation. That is a really good question. It does raise a bunch of questions, but including the one related to the one I just asked, which is, so why would this be a political issue? That is infrastructure funding. Because taken to its logical extreme, you would have to admit that government actually does things and that you're actually going to put up the money and you're going to tax and you're going to actually spend it and pay for things like infrastructure. And it seems to be, what I love about this particular discussion is it forces the two parties to actually figure out what the priorities are. Like, how much do you actually need to spend? Let's take it to the logical extreme. We can say, The Democrats want to spend a boatload of money because they know that the government can stimulate the economy, so they want to spend a fortune on rebuilding the infrastructure. The Republicans are taken to an extreme, are like, no, we don't need to spend anything because all government is bad, therefore we should not be spending any money on infrastructure. And somewhere in the middle, there is the magic number that says, look, this is what we actually need to do, and this is the amount of time we need to spend, and the amount of money we need to spend in order to get the infrastructure, one, updated so it's safe, two, to actually assure that we're meeting the needs of the population. And that raises the other question, meeting the needs of the population. What are those needs? More highways, more trains. But there's a philosophy there too that even comes down to whether or not you should be putting your money in more roads or more railroads. Which goes back to our original conversation, and at this point we're out of time, so we're why is Barry